You're listening to the Weekly Brew.
It's no secret that this podcast endorses high-quality journalism, and if you recall in episode 13, Kevin gave quite a touching tribute following ESPN's decision to end Grantland. Our next guest on the Weekly Brew is a former Grantland staff writer, and that's Jason Concepcion, who was hired as a writer for The Ringer back in March, which is a new digital venture from Bill Simmons that launches this summer. Jason, thanks for joining us this week, and before we get started, how is everything going with you up in New York, and what does the preparation process look like as The Ringer prepares to launch?
Preparation process, wow. Mostly right now it's trying to get up to game speed, so to speak, so that we're ready for the turn of the internet, the speed of the internet once we do launch, and just kind of trying to get all our launch stories kind of into stages of readiness so that we can do them. Just for me, it's just a super, I've got the NBA plus Game of Thrones, and then the stories that I'm working on for launch. So what it looks like is just kind of it looks like a boat that's on fire out at sea with people running around on the deck.
So I think a lot of folks that listen may be more familiar with your Twitter handle than your actual name, @Network. Of course, you have a lot of Twitter followers, and deservedly so. But and then you also been writing for the Ringer newsletter, which if our listeners have not signed up for yet, we highly recommend it. And your most recent piece, you're talking about what's going on up there with the Knicks. Phil Jackson, the Triangle, Jeff Hornacek does not seem to be a fit. Kind of a surprise that Kurt Rambis wasn't hired there. What is happening, and what's the deal with the Triangle? It strikes me as being kind of like the Force. No one really understands it. It doesn't seem to work for everyone, and Phil Jackson's kind of like the Yoda that's sort of trying to make it all work. What's going to happen with this franchise?
Well, the Triangle, it's complicated. The Triangle still obviously has a very deep relationship to the Triangle offense, and it's an offense based on principles like egalitarian principles of movement. Lots of offenses have certain Triangle principles in terms of the way people cut and when they cut. What makes the triangle is just primarily the way it's based out of the elbows, and so that therefore it puts a premium on passing big men who can make decisions. I think in terms of the Knicks, the thing that's not so great about the Triangle is there's just so many reads, so many cuts, so many kind of prescribed movements that it's so egalitarian that it's not often the case that you want to give certain players the power to dictate an offense, and that's what it's set up to do. Sorry, Manchester United just won the FA Cup. And so therefore it's just complicated. It's complicated for players to learn. It's the kind of offense where if it's not executed at top speed, its effectiveness falls off. And especially the team the Knicks are, where it's you're not really sure who's sticking around, who's going to be here, what kind of stability you're going to have, it's really hard to implement it. And that's why you see the Knicks do things like give Sasha Vujicic a contract in the NBA in the year 2016, because the guy knows how to run the Triangle, and if you need somebody on the floor who actually knows how to run it. So the addition of Hornacek was a surprise because he's not immediately, you don't think Triangle when you think Jeff Hornacek. He ran kind of like a modern offense in Phoenix. Although I guess when he was playing in his early days as a player, Phoenix did run the Triangle, so there's that kind of connection. But, it remains to be seen how dedicated he's going to be to the Triangle offense.
Yeah, that's what I wonder about. Is he going to have the freedom to sort of mold the offense into his own, vision, I guess? And Kristaps Porzingis obviously is going to be a huge part of that. Or is it going to be the same adherence to Phil Jackson's philosophy, the Triangle, basically running it from the top down? Or will Hornacek have a bit more freedom to open it up?
That remains to be seen. From everything I've seen that's been said, he will have that freedom. But, we'll see. That was Derek Fisher not running the Triangle in a pure form is kind of the reason that was given for why he was let go. I don't think that's I think that's kind of true, and I don't think it's the only reason, but I do think that was a factor. So that remains to be seen, like how dogmatic Phil is going to be about running pure triangle principles. It's good. I mean, it's like as a Knicks fan, it's great. It's like I think it's great that Kristaps is not going to be asked to post up like a ton.
As we're a Houston-based podcast, the Rockets' head coaching vacancy seems to be an ongoing concern for those that are fans of the Rockets. And it doesn't seem like the Rockets are making much progress in terms of hiring a head coach. It seems like they're interviewing people each day. But one of the names that has emerged as essentially one of the finalists is Mike D'Antoni, who coached with the Knicks, for 4 years, from 2008 to 2012 when he resigned. But he didn't really have as much success there as he did in Phoenix. And he's a guy that, is going to run that up-tempo offense, which would cater to a guy like James Harden. But for me, when I look at the Rockets, it doesn't seem like a great cultural fit. It seems that they need somebody that is, more defensive focused. What can you tell us about D'Antoni, and do you think he would be a good fit for the Rockets organization?
I actually do. I think that would be, in theory, in a vacuum, it would be a great spot for him. I think there's certain personality / cultural things, as you say, that might make it tough, but that's like the case anywhere. You're going to have to deal with the players, the culture of the players. I think once Dwight makes his decision, I think that becomes easier because you don't have two players who are pulling down max or near max salaries who hate each other. So that helps. I think they need more shooting in order to really run D'Antoni's offense, but I think his defensive shortcomings are a little overblown. I mean, you look at his Phoenix teams are always middle, league average defense or a little bit better. They were never abjectly terrible. I would say the one thing about D'Antoni is he doesn't really have an overarching defensive philosophy in the way that you would say Thibodeau does, where it's like they have a scheme. It was more like just D up your guy and help each other. But it wasn't, it was very simple in that sense, but it wasn't, it's not like he just issued defense. That's as his reputation says. I think he's an okay defensive coach. And I think if he gets the right staff, that wouldn't be a problem.
So you follow the NBA playoffs and you tweet about it as much and as amusingly as anyone that I'm aware of. And I'm just curious, so far throughout what has been obviously a historic season for the Golden State Warriors in the regular season, and then a really stellar playoffs push by the Thunder, what has stood out most to you so far throughout the playoffs, and what's made the most lasting impression to you out of what you've seen thus far?
Honestly, I would say, it's just they're in the East, but the way the Cavs are kind of gelling as a team, with the addition of Channing Frye playing at the same time as Kevin Love, that kind of spacing has really opened up their offense. And they just kind of for a team that over the course of the year, there have been certain questions about how guys get along and LeBron's relationship with his teammates and is he closer with his ex-teammates? They really seem to have come together. I mean, winning really helps culture, but at the same time, they were winning when people were questioning whether they liked each other, and it's been really awesome. I don't know, can they beat the Warriors or the Thunder? I'm just really enjoying what I'm seeing from them. You're really seeing a team that's coming together before your eyes.
We will not know until they play whoever comes out of the Western Conference, which, if I had to guess, would still be Golden State, but obviously Oklahoma City looking good too. So I want to talk about Game of Thrones with you because you have written a lot about Game of Thrones, spilled as much ink as anyone I know, and I think that it is... it's amazing what a well that is of sort of looking to modern culture and drawing parallels and the meaningfulness of that show to a lot of people. And just having written so much about it and obviously connected with it yourself, what is it about that show that makes it such a touchstone for audiences all over the country?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's something about its depiction of politics that is kind of seems very true even today. In our modern world, there's something about the zero-sum nature of their politics, and the way everything a character does in that show has several levels of meaning to it. Like there's the out meaning, and then there's the secondary and tertiary strategies that they're going for. It's like if Cersei is talking to the Tyrells about storming the Sept of Baelor and getting back the Tyrell heirs from, like, freeing them from prison. There's the surface level where that's really the right move, and then there's the tertiary level where, and also if the Tyrell kids get killed in this is kind of good for me. So there's that aspect to it, and I think that there's also something about watching characters in a super, super, super long form format on television grow. That's just kind of like very magnetic. That's just something that's entrancing to people. I think there's a lot of parallels to the way the shape and form of our current world that you can see in there, which makes it great fiction.
I think one of the interesting things about Game of Thrones is just how much of a cultural phenomenon it actually is. I mean, there are Game of Thrones watch parties at bars here in Houston, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. But, you mentioned the political aspect and how it kind of integrates a little bit with our society and culture now. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective. From New York, you've got a presidential candidate and Donald Trump and a former New York Senator Hillary Clinton that are both going to be the presumptive nominees for their respective parties come November's election. If you're comparing them to Game of Thrones characters, how would they fit in, and who do you think they would actually kind of correlate with?
Oh, man. Trump is kind of he's not a one-to-one match, but he's like the High Sparrow crossed with Joffrey a little bit, where he's got like obviously the High Sparrow is very concerned about like class inequality and the oppression of, he's got like this very Bernie aspect to him where it's like the rich against the poor and the class struggle. That plays into Trump as well, but Trump has this more like nativist raw racism to him, which doesn't really correlate to either kind of like any of the characters in the show. So I think Joffrey, just because he was like just like a slave to his own desires. Like he's just a pure teenager who like he didn't have a lot of inhibitions and zero impulse control. He was gonna, if he wanted to shoot a crossbow like at a woman, he would do it. Let's see, Hillary, very calculating, not very, I guess, kind of like a, oh man, she's tough too, because she's calculating and obviously intelligent, probably just doesn't project a lot of human warmth, like naturally. I guess like some kind of like maybe Tyrion kind of in a way, in the way that the characters, like the vast majority of characters in Game of Thrones, the general population just don't relate to him, even though he's in theory good at what he does. They're just not apt to warm up to him.
On short notice, that was a good pull, I think. Obviously, you are as plugged into that show as anyone else that we are aware of. But my pick personally for Hillary would have to be Cersei. I think that coldness you're speaking to really ties in well there. I'm not sure if she is as diabolical, but you never know. We may find out come election time. But so I'm curious. Obviously, you are a terrific writer. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that of many people. I really enjoy your work, and it makes great sense that you are where you are, but I'm curious how you got there. How did you get discovered, or how were you first hooked up with Grantland and Bill Simmons?
Well, I mean, it's really, they got me off the internet. I was tweeting about basketball, and through that, my follower count steadily grew, which was not really the goal, but just kind of happened. And through there, some other spaces asked me if I wanted to write a couple things. I wrote for Classical, I wrote for Deadspin, I wrote for SB Nation, a couple pieces here and there. And I guess that proved that I could write in larger than 140 character formats. And so then I was contacted by the guys at Grantland, kind of like on a provisional basis. You want to try and write a couple of things for our shoot-arounds, some basketball stuff? Sure. And from there, it grew into a full-time thing. I got lucky, I suppose you could say. Never stop tweeting, everybody.
That's always good advice. But, I'm kind of curious. It seems like just from an outsider's perspective, I mean, just the network of writers and journalists and, content creators, both at Grantland and The Ringer, is just phenomenal. And what is it like working in that type of atmosphere? And how would you kind of describe those work dynamics?
It's like terrifying and great at the same time because at Grantland, it was just like, we had Brian Phillips and we had just like Wesley and we, it's like Molly, like just people that were just like killer, like would write stuff, Alex Papademos, where they would write stuff and you're just like that's really good. And so it forced you to bring it like just every time you sat down to write something, you just really, 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 really have to bring it. And that's exciting. And that's the same kind of thing there is at The Ringer. We had, we've had a couple of staff meetings where we're just pitching stuff around, and it's like you're listening to people's ideas, and it's like, everybody here is really smart. It's going to be good. It's just really exciting to be around like creative people who are just crazy smart and like good at what they do. It's invigorating. It's really fun.
Now, kind of on a sports perspective, it seems like every time you have great players that play together, they always elevate their game. And I would argue that The Ringer is just a collection of great writers. How much does that force you to elevate your game in a sense in terms of producing content week in and week out?
I mean, it's really it is a like flaming atomic sun under your seat, like at all times, just forcing you to write really like. Force you to write about really interesting topics and write about them really well. I mean, everybody that we have right now is just like an absolute crusher. And so you really feel like to justify the fact that you draw a paycheck, like you really have to bring it like all the time. At least, I mean, I feel that way. I'm sure like every writer I've ever talked to is like has that feeling of, oh man, I've got to like do something great right now. Because I'm sure you guys know, like, writing is like this cycle of like self-loathing where it's like you write something, you turn it in, and there's like a response, and if people like it, you're like feel great about yourself for like a day, and then you sit down to write the next thing, and you're like, I forgot how to write. I don't know how to do this. Like in the 24 hours since that thing came out, I completely forgot how to write at all. Like I don't know what I'm doing. How do I do this? And then I hate myself. What am I going to do? And that just is like this constant cycle. So it's healthy, that's a healthy way to live.
I could not relate more, honestly. And that's exactly what my day in and day out is like, is that desperate need for feedback, which listeners to this podcast are very familiar with, me begging for iTunes reviews and the like. But I'm curious, I consider Grantland to be extremely successful in terms of what it produced and the value that it had to people, in their hearts and minds. And I anticipate much the same for The Ringer. I see a lot of the same writers there, a lot of the same mentality, philosophy. I'm curious, is there a lesson that other organizations, media outlets can learn from the way that Grantland and The Ringer are doing things? Or is that really just like a sort of Bill Simmons magic that you can't reproduce anywhere else?
Yeah, I don't know if I think I'm too close to it to really know if there's a lesson. Like, I think that's, like the number one thing I take out of it is just surround yourself with people who aren't assholes, who are smart, who want to do really good work, whatever that may be. I mean, I sometimes like the stuff that we do is silly and can seem like about really like lightweight stuff. Sports by and large on a day in and day out basis is not like life and death, but we take it really seriously. We take like television really seriously. We take everything in culture really seriously. And just surround yourself with people like that and just hope everything works out for the best. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's just out of your control when you're in this business.
Yeah, that's great insight. And Jason, we definitely appreciate you joining us this week on the podcast. And, you're very active on social media. As you just told us a few minutes ago, never stop tweeting. For those that are interested in following your work, whether it's on Twitter, on your Tumblr page, which I highly recommend checking out, or, even on The Ringer, what is the best way for them to not only follow you, but also find your work?
I would follow the Ringer Facebook page. That's where you'll get the most updates about, and sign up for our newsletter. So from there, you'll find our whole stable of fantastic writers, our podcasts, and you'll know when the site launches in a proper fashion, which should be sometime in June, but don't ask me for a real date.
All right. Well, Jason, we definitely appreciate you joining us this week on the Weekly Brew podcast. And for those that are interested in following his work on Twitter, you can check out his Twitter handle. That's @network, and that's NETW3RK. Jason, we appreciate it.
Thank you.